speak to them, to hug them, to give them a kind word, just say, man, just keep on keeping on and do good. Everybody needs that encouragement. And so when you're returning, you haven't been to the doctor. You haven't had your yearly exams. You haven't gone to the doctor. So I'm working on doing wraparound services for that, to do things for housing, anything that they need, not to have like the paternalistic strategies and say, oh, this is what you need, because I know it's highly individualized for everyone. And so those are the type of things that I do. And when you talk about trauma, I wanted to break it down because trauma is not just trauma. There's 3 different types of trauma. There's acute trauma, there's chronic, and there's complex trauma. And acute trauma results from a single incident. And trauma could be even something like, I'm scared to get in elevators. And I don't know where that came from. Even when I was pregnant, I would walk into the 8th floor because I didn't want it to come about being closed up in those spaces, and I don't even know where that came from. Being in a car accident, and a lot of times I was working with Erin Mallory from Grow, and we were doing a trauma-informed community, and we noticed that when we sat down with community members, a lot of them didn't even know what trauma was, because it's part of our culture. Stuff happens to us, and we'll normalize it, but then it doesn't go away. We'll just keep saying, oh, it's okay, I'll make it through, I'll make it through, but it's okay to not be okay, but what's not okay is to not do anything about it. So like if your tooth is hurting, you're gonna go where? If you can't see when you're reading, you're gonna go to the eye doctor. So if you find yourself, and I'm skipping a little bit to talk about some of the physical things that you'll see when you're going through trauma, and it makes people like nervous, you can't sleep, you're worried a lot, you isolate yourself, you're probably not eating, and a lot of different things like that. It impacts you. And so when you talk about acute trauma, it happens from a single incident. When you talk about chronic trauma, it's repeated and prolonged, such as domestic violence or abuse. And complex trauma is exposure to a variety and multiple traumatic events that often happen in invasive or interpersonal events. And so these are, you have those different physical and mental pieces when it's not addressed. Like a lot of times people say children are so resilient, but if children were so resilient, then it wouldn't be so many adults that had a lot of mental illness. And all of us have mental health, just like we all have eyes, ears, nose, teeth, or whatever. But if you find yourself where you're not feeling the right way, you're upset all the time, then it's really time for you to go get some help. And so for physical, some of the physical things that you can look for is that you'll be exhausted, confused, very sad, and have a lot of anxiety, very agitated. People can't really say anything to you or talk to you. You just feel numb, like nothing that really happens to you. I remember working in a clinic on 55th and State, and a guy ran in there, and some people were chasing him, and they came and shot him. He fell out dead in the floor, and everybody was just walking over him, just saying, when is my appointment? I've been here for an hour. They act like it didn't even happen. So that's how we've been. And just as a culture, our people, anything connected to anything we don't want to deal with, but it's okay to not be okay, but you just have to go do something about it and go seek help. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're always confused and all that type of stuff, and like I said, you isolate yourself, those are different physical attributes. And unaddressed trauma can also make you feel more vulnerable. You don't want to tell people what's going on with you because you'll feel embarrassed about it, and it causes you to develop mental health problems. And so it can be something like post-traumatic syndromes, and those could also lead to different dementias and things of that nature. And some people misuse alcohol or drugs. My daughter's father had a substance use problem, and he died last Easter unexpectedly. But I remember when I first met him, we were young, and he always would talk about the fact fact that he didn't know who his father was. And he was a very smart man, had a lot of stuff going on, but that bothered him. And it was like he really hated his father. He didn't even want to go and even meet him. And then I believe that's something that caused him to start using because of that trauma, and it wasn't addressed. And what was even worse was because his oldest sister and his youngest sister had the same father, and he was in the middle. And so they used to tease him that he didn't have a father and things like that. So sometimes he would still talk about it. When I met him, he was 25, and he was still talking about it. But I believe that that caused him to have the substance use, this, abuse that he had, which led to his death. But those type of things really need to be addressed so you can have a better and thriving life.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that very clinical definition, and I think exactly where you kind of just drove the conversation is kind of how we'll segue into Mr. Sean Hill, because as you got to talking about examples, but let's Hill, could you please describe some of the work you do, and then please describe some of the common trauma you often treat for individuals from this community? As Doc kind of got to explain one example, I'm pretty sure you have some other ones. So.
Oh yeah, definitely was resonating. And thanks again for the invitation. It's always good to be out with this prestige group of panelists and around a timely topic that many of us who are in urban communities recognize is finally getting some of the attention that we've probably seen for ages. So my role at Chicago Survivors is the executive director. We respond to homicides in the city of Chicago. So whenever there's a homicide, we are dispatching someone to go to the scene of the crime, medical examiner's office if needed, or the hospital, wherever the body is, that's where we go. And the reason for that is because that's where the family is going to go. Right? So the family are who we need to connect with. They are the survivors of violence. And many times when we first came to this work, I got to this work in 2015. I was hired to be a family support specialist at that time. I was working in criminal defense law for 8 years on a legal team as a clinical social worker. And so I went from that side of helping people returning citizens to actually helping the families who are impacted by the people who were being incarcerated for some of the acts that took place. But when we get to those families, many times they don't realize that they are a survivor of the violence. And most narratives would say that the person who was murdered was a survivor. But no, the children, that mother, that grandmother, that friend, their neighbor, all of those people are survivors of violence in our community. And that violence is, what we consider complex trauma. And it is going to have a lot of features related to it, such as complicated grief, which is not traditional grief when you lose someone per se to cancer and you have a preparation period of time to do your closure and your farewells. This complex trauma is senseless loss. And so when you cannot make sense of violent acts, people get stuck. And that is the root of complicated grief. A lot of our work, when we are going to help with the families, is helping them to realize what happened to you was not normal. What you're going through is normal because it is a criteria of trauma. And so your response and the way your body is responding, the way your mind is trying to process and think, it is actually biologically set up to cause you to survive. We may not even hear it in that way, right? It is about survival. And so untreated trauma creates more of these kind of malfunctioning survival instincts through community. And our approaches to that are around neuroscience in our clinical work at Chicago Survivors. So we do narrative therapy, which is around storytelling a lot, and neuroscience. And that neuroscience, if people are familiar and maybe not, I'm gonna throw it out there because you can ask your therapist. Do you know how to do EMDR? Do you know how to do eye movement, desensitizing and reprocessing? So I'm just not retelling the story and re-traumatizing myself over and over. Traumatic reactions and help me to desensitize so I to show up in my community and I have to relive events over and over and over again and go back to that part of my brainstem, can you help me not to do that?
Humiliations, to things that are demeaning, to dehumanization, and then having a group of people come into your classroom within the prison setting who are immediately on the defensive, and it definitely takes, you can palpably feel the space and some tension. First of all, people being signed up for a class that they didn't know they were going to be taking. I'm like, what is going on here? Why are you signing people up when they don't know why they're here? There are aspects to that which are dealing with stress. And then hear more and more of from the participants are the emotional aspects of trying to deal with a chronic condition like diabetes, or when we teach chronic disease self-management. That first day someone pulled me aside, this last time we taught it, during the break, and said, so I have asthma, but I also have depression, but I really didn't want to talk about it. And so as part of the program, the two leaders actually do modeling, because we've got our own chronic conditions. And him saying that, when we then talked about our own chronic conditions, I do have chronic depression. And as soon as I brought that up and said, boy, those floodgates open. And a lot of the men in the room said, yeah, okay, I have asthma, but I also have depression. Like, okay, all right, look at now people are starting to talk about it. But there's no, it's a helpless feeling of, but I can't fix this and I can't change this, other than to have the safe space in the room during whatever program this is. And then as you're getting ready to go home and walk out the door, it's, wow, I just sort of see this backpack full of traumas and difficulties that, I'm so glad you brought up complicated grief, because that was actually something I wrote down, and seeing so much of the trauma connected to loss. And I don't necessarily mean death loss, I mean ambiguous loss. So Pauline Boss was a researcher who came up with this concept of ambiguous loss, those losses that are oftentimes intangible. Things like, I never got to go to, a high school dance, or, you know what, I'm 45 years old now, I'm getting ready to go home. There's so many small things that I missed in my life. So many little losses of friendships, loss of relationships, loss of milestones in my life that, that's what it is. It's those losses, and it's such a sadness that gets carried out the door. And so I feel strongly, like, for me now that I've switched much more toward working with people and better understanding the reentry, the release, the process home, especially for people. So some of you already know, because you participated and spoken with me, that I'm in the middle of a research study right now that focuses on people who went in as teenagers to adult prison, spent at least 20 years in, and came home. And what was that process like, and what is this rebuilding like? And where are those traumas and difficulties, and how can we better address those? Because they need to be addressed, and it seems like everyone I've spoken to is hungry to get those addressed, or have some things come out, and good environments to talk about and process those things. So that's really sort of where I'm at in this pursuit, and I'm learning so much from everyone that I come in contact with. And really, I'm doing the work because the participants, it's like you're the ones with the knowledge and understanding here, and I'm just trying to put it together in a way that can then be something useful out in the community. I hope I answered the question. I kind of wandered around a little bit.
Very much. And going into the next one, I just want to say, if any of you guys ever want to add on to anything, if you guys have any comments, feel free to chime in. But if we don't have anything for what Jackie was saying, I'll go ahead and go to Mr. Tyler Johnson. Tyler, can you please explain to everyone a little bit about the work you do for Phalanx? And I would also like to hear you talk about what are some specific tools or common regulations of treatments that you would offer as far as advice or leading to any resources you yourself would guide to someone who might be suffering from some of the trauma that we're talking about.
Yes. As you said, my name is Tyler Johnson. I am currently a student at University of Illinois Chicago, studying getting my master's in social work. Now I'm interning at Phalanx and have been for the past 2-3 months. Actually going to a 4th month. I have been doing a lot of assessments, mental health assessments, for pretty much anybody that comes into Phalanx looking to get services done or to join any programs. And been scheduling and taking a part of the SOAR program and helping those students out with just having a space, a free space, a safe space to communicate and express their feelings, and then conduct some therapy sessions. So that's what I've been doing for Phalanx. Moving over into the question, I think the very simple and basic answer I can give is get help. But it's a lot easier said than done, because in my what I believe is there's 4 steps to that. So the first step is accepting that we actually need help, and that looks a little different for everybody, but it's allowing that thought to go to your mind that what I'm going through, what I'm experiencing, what I'm feeling is not right. I need to get some professional help or help of some sort. The next step that I believe is committing to that change, and you will see that later on down the line. But it's the commitment to, okay, what's the next step in making this change and really getting myself right mentally and emotionally. And then the next step that comes after that is seeking help. So what are my avenues to get help? And that's kind of where a lot of people stop, because even though we have smartphones, even though it's easy to search up, sometimes finances come into play. And that's kind of where everything stops, like, I can't afford it. And I'll tell you from experience that that is not always true. It's just you're not made aware of all the opportunities and all the different ways that you can afford to get therapy covered. So through Phalanx, if you're going through one of the programs, that service is free to you. You can request it. Transparent personal story I have is that my wife and I, we go to therapy, and that service is usually $100, a little bit north of $120. We pay $30 through our insurance. If you're in school, I know everybody here is not in school, but for your children and whoever, if they are in school, there are social workers on staff and on site to take care of their mental health needs. So there are ways and there are avenues and people in place to take care of mental health needs, but we just need to be made aware of it. So that's the third one. The fourth one is following through. And you will notice that following through and committing to a change is somewhat similar, but they're not the same. So we step away. We look at another analogy of somebody that wants to start a social media or influencing platform. You get into that mindset, you got that momentum, you're feeling good. Oh yeah, I'm gonna go do it. You start to record yourself. I ain't get my hair cut today. I'm gonna push it off to next week or the next day when I get my hair cut. And then that momentum stops. That's why a lot of times you ever go buy a car, the car salesman, if you come in there amped about getting a car, they're trying to push you, they're trying to capitalize on that hype that you're on, that high that you're on. And then a lot of times if the high dies down, our pursuit stops. So that's why it's important to follow through on that goal that you set for yourself to go and seek and actually get help. And then outside of just getting professional help, one thing I'll tell you is, as about to be a professional, I can't claim a social worker yet because I'm not there, but I know journaling, really taking note of different things that took place in a day, and then also some of the triggers that you have. That can be very huge because that could be something that you present when you actually go into that therapy session, if you commit to going, if and when you commit to going. Another one, imagine if you're very artistic, you can be, write poems about it. So that way you can express and kind of put in some of your passion and your craft into your emotions as well. And that's just a few things that I've had for this.
Thanks, Tyler.
Thank you, Tyler.
So our next question, our next panelist, actually one of the panelists is Caitlin Johnson, who was not here today because she got COVID, so she couldn't come. But the question that she had, I thought was one of the most important questions that we addressed tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and go with that question, and I'll address it from my point of view, and then I'll ask the panel to add what they think is, in addition to that. The question is, what are some ways family or the support system or the community can help a returning citizen dealing with trauma? Again, I think that's the meat and potatoes, because you're kind of already up against the gun. I mean, in the sense that you're fighting against, societal expectations and norms and those kinds of things. So it's already up against it. So to me, one of the best things that a family member can do to support somebody is deal with your own trauma first. So that you're not re-traumatizing them with your trauma when they come home and they're experiencing what they're experiencing. And they have a moment and they're saying, matter of fact, I started with a short story. I was walking one day in the grocery store, I was in Jewel. And I'm just walking, I'm kind of mindlessly going shopping. And it's a guy that's walking and shopping in front of me. And he turns around and like, "What's up, man?" And so I said, "Hey, man, how you doing?" Because I'm still oblivious to what's going on. And so when I said, "Hey, how you doing?" he said, "Man, I'm saying you follow me around the store." And I was like, "Oh." And then it dawned on me that he was having a traumatic experience. He was having a moment, he had been activated. And I said, "I'm sorry, man." And so just being aware, of what it looks like, what trauma looks like when it shows up, helped me in the moment not to continue to re-traumatize them. But it also kind of gave me an understanding like, man, this guy has likely, probably, I don't know for a fact, but he probably has been incarcerated. And probably somebody behind him is a moment where I gotta be on guard, man. Like, I can't, why are you behind me? And just being aware of what your significant other, what your family member is going through, what they have gone through. They talked about complicated trauma. That is being repeated exposure to a multitude of traumatic events. So we're talking about an individual. We're not just talking about a number. We're talking about an individual who likely grew up in an environment that was highly traumatizing, which is how he ended up in the situation where he's making bad decisions. Then once he makes the bad decision, then he gets incarcerated. Now he's being talked down to by guards. So now I feel less than I did before I got here. Now I'm being targeted as if I show any signs of weakness, if I show any signs of vulnerability, then I got a target on my back. So now I'm extremely guarded. And so just the awareness of us in the community of what that feels like, what that looks like. Just, again, not even having to experience it, but just from an empathy standpoint. I know, just from driving in the neighborhood and the police get behind me. I'm educated. I've gone to multiple universities and graduated. I've served the country. I'm a veteran. But when the police get behind me, man, I get scared. And that's real talk. That's, as a black man in America, that's the reality of it. And I don't understand that, then I can't help other people understand it. So when you got somebody that's coming home and they've been exposed to a multitude of trauma over a lifetime, basically, you have to have some level of understanding as to what they're going through so that you can be empathetic enough to let them experience what they're experiencing and then still be supportive of them after that. So, that's my take on that. But I would welcome the panelists to actually add their opinions as well, and then kind of.
One thing I would like to add before I do that, I am the rookie of the panelists. I forgot to say, I am honored to be on this panel as well. It's a complete honor because, like I said, I'm a rookie. They have way more experience than I do, but I'm happy to sit alongside them and be able to speak to you all as well. One thing I would like to add to that is eliminating some of the biases we have, implicit biases we have, especially being friends, family, community members. And it's biases I think we all have until we kind of experience those people in our lives. I have a dear friend of mine now. We've been cool for a number of years. We coach together, play together. I know his son, he's older than me. And he just told me that he was a felon about a year ago. And it was like, I had this, whether I wanted to believe it or not, I had this in my mind of what a felon looked like. I had that built into my mind. So when he told me this, I was like, "You lying?" and so I think we really need to, take that stigma away and just realize that there are humans that just may have had a moment in life, because a lot of times the damage that was done is a matter of minutes, even seconds.
Yep.
And so just realizing that there's still people at the end of the day that just had a moment. They just had a moment. That's important to know that and still treat them as if they're the loved ones that you had before they were incarcerated.
And I wanted to add that education piece that you talked about is key, because education gives you options and helps you make informed decisions. And the first research project I worked on, it was for a diabetes project, and they had a concept, and it was called diabetes etiquette. And it wasn't for the person that had the diabetes, it was for their family members who would get them in front of a Thanksgiving meal and say, "You can't eat that, you got sugar," or "Don't drink this pop," and the do's and don'ts. So if something could be developed, like even some courses or classes that can help family members so that they can be a better support to their loved ones that's returning home, would be good too, because sometimes we don't know exactly what to say or do, and really realizing, and like you said too, they're a different person now too. So things you may used to do before, you can't do it now, And then if you sign up to be that support system, you can't be a fair weather friend. You have to be there for the long haul. Now, if they don't change, if you say I'm gonna give them 6 months, it might take them 6 years, So you just have to be there for the long haul. So.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Sign you back in.
I just concur, really, everything and I've just been nodding my head, and the only word that's kind of left, and I think it complements is the psychoeducation, and so being able to have someone who is a returning citizen come back into the community, they have to do certain things. I think that even coming back into the family system, making sure that the family system is empowered with the information, the terms around what is going on with your loved one, because, when they come back home, do we know what we are actually allowing into our environment and our atmosphere? And I'm not saying it as if it's a creature or an animal. I'm talking about the other things that have now been uncovered and discovered because they've been in another environment. And atmosphere and environment is so powerful, right? People can change an atmosphere just by their energy and their presence, right? So when we're going to have that in our atmosphere, in our environment, we should prepare and be educated, and all of what's been suggested should be in that class.
Yes.
I just like to add, I love when you mentioned about the training with Aaron Mallory. His name came up late. I think he would have been perfect for the panel as well.
Oh, yeah.
But that, I had never heard of that, but once I learned about trauma informed, like from an organizational standpoint, from an individual standpoint, my mind went like, we need trauma informed communities. That's exactly what we need. And with that, the city made a great point of, for that person or that loved one to first know and understand what type of trauma they're dealing with. But I think even with this conversation of normalizing the talk of mental health, I would love to see the community and us as people just more in tune with people talking about their trauma. And like, I know for me personally, right, as a returning citizen who was incarcerated for an extremely long period of time, I developed some residual effects of that trauma. And the thing is that thankfully I was able to go through a place called Kiwani, that was a life skills and reentry center, and it allowed me the opportunity to I think it was kind of perfect because I was still in an incarcerated setting, but it was intentional about being free. So I was actually able to see, where I started at and where I finished. So I knew I had unpacked some of that. But the thing is most individuals that are returning from incarceration don't have this.
Right.
You have a lot of individuals who are returning from incarceration that have absorbed all of this trauma and don't even know and realize that this trauma is a trauma until they come out into the community. Now it's like, hey, you're free. Now be normal. And then these people get back in front of their family members and it's like, now they're starting to see, hold on, you mean me getting aggressive when somebody seemingly gets aggressive with me ain't acceptable out here? So my overall point being, as a community, as this conversation gets normalized, it'll be understandable and it'll be okay when someone says, okay, you standing over me is kind of triggering me in a way, and it's not laughed about. It's like, ooh, you know what? I apologize. Let me step back and then continue to talk to you. So, and hopefully, I believe at the end of this conversation, hopefully we'll all be more aware of some of the issues, and then we can start with it with ourselves as far as being aware and helping everybody in our community, because so many of us are impacted. I'm pretty sure 8 out of 10 people in here can raise a hand about a family or a close person in their family who is, dealt with incarceration. So, thank you all.
Yes, sir. They got hands over there.
Oh, you got hands back
Y'all
there?
got an audience.
All right, Mike?
Well, mine isn't so much a question but a comment. As a formerly incarcerated person who has experienced all of these traumas, right? I was you all just very well educated me on a lot. And these traumas that you're talking about, I had to bury them all as a defense mechanism. Like the losses that you talk about, the deaths and stuff like that. You can't allow yourself to grieve and feel those things, or you might lose your sanity, right? But then when you get out, you have to deal with these things. But I just want to, because after each one of you all spoke, and I want to say something to each one of you all, because each one of you all said something so powerful and so important. I just want to thank you all, commend you all for expounding on what is such a taboo subject in our communities. And it was kind of a late notice, but something like this, boy, this whole building, everybody needs to hear this, and I really want to push for us to be able to do this again, where we can have a giant crowd to hear this, so that they can in turn go back and share with the family and the community and with themselves. I learned so much today. It was so thorough and comprehensive, and you all did it so sushi. But I just want to thank you all for that, and man, I'm blown away by what all of you all have said, and I just appreciate you all, man. Let's give them another.
I feel like with the reentry program, it should be a program called readjustment for the families that's waiting on their loved ones to come home. Because as they're going through the process to re-enter into society, we need to readjust to the fact that they've been gone so long. They experienced something. They have things that they experienced that we wouldn't be able to understand because we didn't experience it.
Right.
And with the readjustment factor, we need to learn more patience, be mindful of how we say things. A simple, normal touch to us could be something that's offensive to them that they have to guard against. So while they're going through, say for instance, 6 months of re-entry, the family that they're coming home to should go through that 6 months of readjustment, so everybody is on the same page and balancing things out, so we give them more support, so they don't make the same mistake and go back. So I think that's something we need to start working on.
Yes.
Reentry, readjustment.
All right.